What's up, guys? Levi here. So, what I wanted to do today was basically, as part of this music channel, I wanted to talk about some music related things, some artists, do some top 10s, some rankings, and whatnot. So, I thought the best place to start with that would be to do basically a career overview of the architects so far. So the Architects were formed in 2004 in the UK by two brothers, Dan and Tom Searle. Sam Carter didn't join until a little later on after they'd done the first album. And then, the band found success with, Hollow Crown, kind of took a bit of a dip for the here and now, and then from like Daybreaker onwards, they just kept finding more and more success. Unfortunately, in that time, Tom Searle passed away from cancer, which rest in peace, Tom. And basically, after their trilogy, being Lost Forever, All Our Gods, and Holy Hell, they've still continued to make music. The trilogy in particular, I know, is held in high regard to a lot of Architects fans because it basically documents the journey of Tom's condition. They found out about the cancer during Lost Forever, and then All Our Gods was the final album with Tom, and then Holy Hell was the first album without him, but there were still parts of that album that Tom had at least written. And then following on from those albums, they decided to kind of like switch things up a little bit, which I know it's gotten a bit of a mixed reaction with a lot of fans. I know, especially with Classic Symptoms. But then they really managed to bounce back with The Sky and the Earth and All Between, which was produced by Jordan Fish, who's done so much work within metalcore and those kind of bands recently. But so to start off, I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. The first two albums, being Nightmare and Ruin, I have listened to them, but not enough that I could give a definitive, ranking or a score. I got into Architects in between the Here and Now and Daybreaker. I heard a couple of songs from Here and Now, and then I heard Devil's Island, that would eventually be on Daybreaker. And then I decided to go back and I listened to Hollow Crown and I really enjoyed that album. And then I went further back and the first two albums just weren't for me. And even trying to like re-listen to them nowadays, I just still can't get into them at all. So I don't really think it'd be fair to give them like any sort of score. So I'm just going to put them in like an honorable mention category instead. So moving on from that, I'll get started with the records that I have listened to, and I'll give my thoughts and opinions on them, as I've listened to all these like a lot more in depth and just a lot more in general. Now, I just want to add here as well that just because I might have a certain opinion of, a certain album doesn't mean that that is like the definitive opinion. Like we all have our own opinions, we're all entitled to them. Maybe somebody thinks that Classic Symptoms, for example, is their best album. Maybe some people think All I Got is their worst album. We're all entitled to our opinions. This is just me giving off mine. So coming in at number 9, we have Hollow Crown. Hollow Crown for me was the album that I went back and listened to after Here and Now and Devil's Island. And for me, it was a really enjoyable album. It came at a sort of time where I was getting into all of these, like, post-hardcore and metalcore bands. So I was listening to, like, a lot of Asking Alexandria, for example. I was listening to Motionless in White as well. The opening 5 tracks, in particular, they are definitely the highlight of the album. Early Grave, as an opener, it definitely set the tone for what was to come for the band, not only in this album, but for later on as well. Middle of the album, it had a little bit of a lull for me. So, We're All Alone and Borrowed Time, they were kind of like, yeah, I guess they're okay. And then the last 5 songs just didn't really do it for me. Overall, I'm going to do these rankings in like percentages. So overall, I gave The Hollow Crown a 67%, which I know might be a lot low for some people, but to me, it was just about how the album felt and like how much I would, to this day go back and re-listen to it. Coming in at number 8, and this is probably going to be a hot take, I've ranked Classic Symptoms of a Broken Spirit above Hollow Crown. Now, for me, after Holy Hell, obviously Architects had like this evolution in sound. They wanted to do something a little bit different, which I will always respect that sort of thing. I'm a massive Linkin Park fan, and all their albums are like really different. So, I'm open to people and bands trying to evolve their sound. But overall, this album for me, it was just okay. The singles in particular I did really like. So, Deep Fake, Tear Gas, were really good. I really liked Burn Down My House as well. I remember listening to that song for the first time, and then it was just in my head for days for whatever reason. And then the rest of the album is just, it's just okay, and then we get to the final song, Be Very Afraid, and for me, I was listening to this thinking, where was this Architects for the rest of the record? It kind of very much felt like a song that was sort of tacked on at the end just to sort of appease those Architects fans that wanted like a heavier sound. Overall, I thought the album was just fine, and I gave that a 76%. Coming in at number 7, we have The Here and Now. This was the Architects album that got me into the band. Without this album, I probably wouldn't be listening to Architects to this day. I mean, maybe I would, but this was definitely the album that got me into the band. So I think the first song that I heard from the band was Day In, Day Out, and I thought it was a pretty good song. It wasn't too heavy because at that time I was sort of getting into those heavier bands. So I felt like it was very accessible, which I think this is why bands should be doing albums like this a lot more. Like I said, I'm not too fussed about bands evolving their sound, but don't make a shit album, essentially. But yeah, Day In, Day Out, I really like this song. I thought it was really accessible to get into that sort of music. And then we had Learn to Live as well, which was, again, a really good song. Delete Rewind, love that one. And then BTN. When I first heard that song, it gave me kind of like an Alexis on Fire sort of feeling. But then the middle of the album, again, it just was a little bit of a lull. And then we had the song Stay Young Forever, which to me, if they recorded that song last, I understand that, because that song for me was a song that showed what was to come from the band. If that song had have been on Daybreaker, I don't think it would have been out of place. And obviously Daybreaker, again, was the definitive album that said what was to come over these next few albums. Now, Heartburn, I've heard this is a bit of a Marmite song for a lot of people. I don't mind it. I don't mind when bands go kind of soft for a song. Some albums, the softest song can be the best song. I enjoy Heartburn. I know some people might not, but for me, I thought it was a good song. And then Year In, Year Out and Up and Away, that song just didn't connect with me. And for me, what creates the better sorts of albums is that the bands need to, fire on all cylinders from the get-go. They need to also have something to just cap it off. Something that'll satisfy a lot of people. For me, that wasn't one of those songs, but overall, I gave The Here and Now a 77%. Now, this is where things get a little bit difficult, and this is where things might get a bit controversial. A lot of people might disagree on how I rank these next 6 albums coming up. But from this point, this is like Architects at its best. These 6 albums are the albums that would make me, proud to say that I am an Architects fan, and that would have me suggest Architects as somebody who is wanting to dabble into the metalcore and the post-hardcore genre. So, at number 6, I've got Lost Forever, Lost Together, and I know that is a hot take, but at the time that album came out, I had burnt myself out from listening to Architects because I had Daybreak on repeat for the majority of its album cycle. So by the time Lost Forever, Lost Together came out, I was just a bit like, I really want to like this album, but I can't listen to this band, for the time being, because I just listened to them so much. Naysayer was the first single before the album came out, and I really enjoyed that song, and it did have me hyped for the album. But again, I was listening to Naysayer a lot leading up to this album, and then the album came out. I was just like, I can't do this. I essentially had to just put it on the shelf for a little bit because I didn't want to burn myself out from listening to Architects entirely. I feel like that was kind of a good decision because to this day, I can listen to them all the time now. But their first four songs, they're classics. They're absolute bangers in terms of Architects. I'd say my favorite song from the album is Broken Cross. I just liked how heavy it was, and I liked the lyrical content of it. So that song in particular, it does resonate well with me, and for that reason, I think that's my favorite song on the album. And then the rest of the album was it was just okay. I think that whenever I listen to this album, I just kind of feel what I did back then when it initially came out. Cancer, though, that was a really good song as well. But overall, if you'd have asked me a few years ago, this album would have probably been second to last or last. I think I've done well to sort of grow to appreciate this album a lot more now, and I'm going to be awaiting all the hate comments from everyone saying that that's actually their best album. Again, this is just my opinion, and like I've said, some people might rate this their best album, some people might rate it their best album. At the end of the day, we're all entitled to our own opinions. But coming in next is the album that ruined Lost Forever for me, which is Daybreaker. Devil's Island, with what was going on at the time with the London riots and everything, I felt was like a very necessary song to come out. And then the singles came out, so Alpha Omega, These Colours Don't Run, and I really liked the political message that the band was sending. I know that politics in a band can be very hit or miss, but I feel like Architects are one of those bands that absolutely hits it on the fucking nail every time, when they talk about politics within their music. But yeah, the first 6 songs on that album definitely have earned their places as some of the best stuff that they've ever written. It was cool when Ollie Sykes came in on Even If You Win You're Still a Rat. I thought that was pretty cool. And then the back half of the album is where things kind of fell off. When I was initially listening to the band, obviously we all have this thing called recency bias. I was listening to the album start to finish every time for so long, but upon re-listening to it, very recently, the back half of the album just kind of falls off a little bit. Apart from Devil's Island, which I still think is a really important song, but overall, I give Daybreaker an 82%, which I think that's kind of fair, especially with what else is left to come, and especially with what happened after Daybreaker and Lost Forever Lost Together in terms of the albums that they were putting out. Now at number 4 we have For Those That Wish to Exist. So this was the album that kind of started this evolution in their music. They did their trilogy of albums, and then this was the first thing that happened after it. Like I said, I'm not too fussed about a band wanting to evolve their sound, change things up a little bit. The thing is with this album is that it did come in a time where a lot of these metalcore bands or post-hardcore bands were really watering down their sound. So, for example, Bring Me the Horizon, they did Sempiternal, which to me is their first or second best album. That'll be coming soon. You just had so many bands that wanted to mimic what they did. So when I first heard Animals, I liked the song, but I was a little bit wary on where they were going with this. Were they just going to water down their sound to mimic That's the Spirit's success? Or were they going to do something a little bit different with it? Luckily, they managed to make it work, in my opinion anyway, because I know a lot of people were like, this isn't that good. My only criticism of this album is that it does feel like a very long album. Like they could have definitely maybe cut about 2 or 3 songs out of it and just made a bit more of a cohesive album from start to finish. That would be my only criticism of this album. But you have Do You Dream of Armageddon? It was a good opener. I think it set the tone and what the album was going to be. Then you had Black Lungs, Giving Blood, Discourse is Dead, really good songs. It kind of showed that they were evolving their sound, but they were going to still keep, the heaviness in, their sound. You had Dead Butterflies as well, which, I know is some people's favorite single from that album. For me, it was just okay. And then you have An Ordinary Extinction. Then you have Impermanence, which is probably one of my favorite songs on that record. It's one of those heavier songs that can get you kind of pumped up, or it's something good to listen to if you're in a bad mood. And after that, you had Flight Without Feathers, which I think that having that song after what is arguably the heaviest song on the album, I think is really good, because Flight Without Feathers is a good song, but it also gives the listener time to breathe after hearing something like Impermanence, whilst you've got the rest of the album left to come. Little Wonder, I used to really like that song, but nowadays I'm just a little bit, it's okay. Then you've obviously got Animals, Libertine, that's another favourite of mine off the album, Goliath, and then you got Demigod. And to me, Demigod is a little bit of a weird song to come from a band like Architects, but I feel like Architects did it in such a way that made it work. Like, if I was to listen to For Those That Wish to Exist, it would be Impermanence, Libertine, and Demigod. That would be the three songs that I would want to be listening to most of that album. And then you have Meteor, which again is just okay, and Dying Is Absolutely Safe. This is one of those album closers that just didn't hit with me. But overall, I would give For Those That Wish to Exist an 86%. I feel it's one of their better albums. I feel like they did what a lot of bands were doing at the time, which was kind of watering down their sound a little bit, but doing it in a way that still worked and still resonated with a lot of Architects fans and fans that were willing to accept bands want to at some point change their sound up a little bit. Coming up at number 3. So for me, 3, 2 and 1. These are by far the best albums that this band has ever done, in my opinion. As much as I love For Those That Wish to Exist, these 3 albums, if their resume was that and they retired, I think it would be a hell of a career that they had. I could flip-flop between these albums an awful lot. It really just depends on what day it is and how I'm feeling that day. But coming in at number 3 is Holy Hell. I really enjoyed it. I know some people might think it's the worst of the trilogy, which I can see why. There might just be some bias because of the fact that this was an album that didn't have Tom on it. It was the first album without Tom, that there was a slight evolution in the sound coming after All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us. But for me, most of the songs on this album are absolute certified bangers, so Holy Hell is my favourite song off that album. You can definitely feel the emotion going into that song. Okay, so going on from Holy Hell, we have Royal Beggars and Modern Misery as well, which I really do like as songs. They were definitely different to what was on All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us. But again, I just felt that they were good songs. They really... Them two with Holy Hell are definitely the top 3 of that album. And then you have Dying to Heal, which was okay. And then there's the Seventh Circle, which I remember listening to that for the first time. And whenever they did the pick sweep, I just thought to myself, this sounds a lot like Gojira, which I think a lot of people will think when they first hear it if they've listened to Gojira before. It's a very, amped up, angry sort of song. Definitely something that's good to listen to if you're in a mood or if you need to get pumped up to exercise or whatnot. And A Wasted Hymn, for me, again, this is just an album closer that didn't resonate with me. But overall, I would give Holy Hell an 88%. And then number 2, we have got The Sky, the Earth and All Between. Now, this album might be number 2 because of recency bias, because it's the latest album they've done. But after hearing the classic Symptoms of a Broken Spirit, I feel like them going into this sound, definitely was a good bounce back for them. I think a lot of people can consider this album a bit of a return to form for the band after that previous album. Elegy has to be one of the best album openers that they have done. It only comes behind to the album opener of the next album that I'm going to talk about. But then you had Whiplash and Black Hole, which showed the more aggressive and angrier side of the band. And Black Hole probably is my favourite song off that album. It's a very heavy song, but then they have this massive chorus. They've got a guitar solo in it. And just hearing Sam finally be able to use these gutturals more often on this album definitely made this album a great selling point for me, because I wasn't too familiar of Sam's ability to do the low guttural vocals until they released For Those That Wish to Exist, the orchestral version. And in Impermanence, he just let some of these out. I was like, holy fuck, he's capable of this. Where's this Sam? And so it was definitely good to hear that side of him more on this album. Then you have Everything Ends, which I know a lot of people were disappointed that that was the last single that came out before the album, but I think after a song like Black Hole, it's definitely one of those songs that it's not too heavy, it's not too complicated or anything like that. It's just one of those songs that gives the listener a little time to breathe before the next few songs that were coming up. Which then you have Brain Dead, which if the Architects decide to release an album that just sounds like that song, you know what? I'd be all for it. I think a bit more of a punk side of Architects, it definitely suits. Like when they released that song and I heard it for the first time, at first I was a bit like, what the fuck is this? And as the song just progressed, I thought to myself, do you know what? This is actually such a good song. The middle of this album is definitely where they start to enter a bit of a lull phase. Evil Eyes is an okay song. I like the main riff sounded a little bit Limp Bizkit-y, and then the chorus definitely gives off Deftone vibes as to how Sam's singing it. Landmines was just okay. And Judgment Day would have been such a good song. I liked how Amira Elfkey added into it. For me, the only thing that brings that song down is the chorus. If they'd have found something else to say other than Rain, Rain, Go Away, I think it would have just elevated that song a little bit more. I don't know if anybody else feels like this, but when I just listen to Judgment Day and I hear Rain, Rain, Go Away, I kind of cringe a little bit. After that, the album just ends on an absolute banger. So you've got Broken Mirror, which is probably like my second favourite song on the album. It definitely gives me Bad Omens vibes for some reason. It also reminds me of Icy Stars back in their Treehouse era. I don't know if anybody else ever got that, but to me that's just what it kind of reminded me of and sounded like. Curse was a good song as well. So when that initially came out, this was after Seeing Red, and it was just cool to hear that they were just going to double down on this more heavier sound after what had come before. So you got Seeing Red. I know a lot of people are kind of like cringing when they hear the kids chanting they only ever love you when you're seeing red. I don't mind it, you know. Then you have Chandelier, which is probably my second favourite album closer. Again, I'm one of those people, I don't mind the more softer songs from bands as long as they do it right, and to me this was a song that not only did they do it right, they just knocked it out of the fucking park. This song only comes behind on one other song, which I will talk about in a second. But overall, Sky, the Earth and the All Between, this album for me was just like such a good experience listening to it. I feel like it was definitely a return to form for them after Classic Symptoms, and even For Those That Wish to Exist, which even if I really love that album, I would definitely rank this album above that one. But I give The Sky, the Earth and the All Between a 89%. And here we are at number one. which, if you're an Architects fan, you're going to know which one this is. It's All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us. Unfortunately, I wasn't listening to the band at the time that this album came out. I only listened to this full album after I'd heard Holy Hell. I did hear a couple of songs though when they were like doing promo for the album. But yeah, I heard A Match Made in Heaven and I heard Gone with the Wind, and A Match Made in Heaven was a good song, but Gone with the Wind, that song, even to this day, I can still put on and I can still just feel everything that I was feeling at the time. I can feel the emotion that's been put into this track overall. We'll get onto that a little bit more in a little bit. So their opening song was Nihilist, and this to me is the best opening of any of their albums. The way that Sam just screams, "All our gods have abandoned us," again, you can just feel the emotion that was put into that lyric. But going on from that, this album overall was like 90% bangers. You got Death Wish, Phantom Fear, Downfall, Gone with the Wind. Now going back to Gone with the Wind, this song, sometimes I kind of tear up listening to it because I know what was going on at the time. Obviously I don't personally know, but I can only imagine how the band and Tom were feeling when they were writing this, when they were recording this. When things go calm and Sam just starts singing, A Sickness with No Remedy Except the Ones Inside of Me, you could definitely tell that he was upset when doing those vocals. Obviously, it's completely understandable because of what was going on at the time. But whenever I hear that band in particular, that's when I start feeling like, I'm going to tear up. Also, with having one of my friends unfortunately pass away, whenever I heard that song Ever Since, I just felt such a deeper connection with it. I think that's all I'll say about that, because I don't really want to get into that. Gone with the Wind, best song of the album. I'd argue it's the best song that they've ever done as a band. Empty Hourglass, Match Made in Heaven, Gravity, All Love Is Lost and From the Wilderness. They're the only two songs off this album which I'm a bit impartial to. All Love Is Lost I just couldn't get into at all, but From the Wilderness, I can listen to it, but it's not the song that I'm thinking of when I'm going into this album. And then Memento Mori. Yeah, Memento Mori, definitely the best closing song this band has ever done. For a band that, for me, has been hit and miss in terms of their closing tracks, obviously they have Chandelier, which was a really good one, but this, for me, was their best closing track. Overall, I give All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us a 90%, which is definitely high. I don't think I could give any album 100%. I don't think I could give many albums above a 95%. So for me, a 90% for this album, for this band, it definitely shows that they did something right with this. Definitely shows that their hearts and souls were poured into this album. So for that reason, All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us, to me, is their best album, and to me is one of the best metalcore albums of all time. If anybody came to me, said to me, I want to get into metalcore, I want to get into post-hardcore, give me an album, that is the album that I would give them, hands down. But also I would give them the story about it as well. I would tell them about what was going on with the band at the time, just so that when they listen to this album, they understand what's going on. But to me, this was a very important album to the band. It was a very important album to the fans. And this album came out 10 years ago. Even if I was a little late to listening to this album, by like a couple of years, the fact that I'm still listening to it in 2026 and feeling the emotions that I'd felt the first time I listened to that album, they did something right there. That's my Architects album rankings. Like I said before, there might be some hot takes in there. There might be some albums that people might want to put first instead of All Our Gods. There might be some albums people want to put last instead of Nightmare Ruins, Hollow Crown. At the end of the day, these are just my opinions. Like, I'm not telling people what album's the best. I'm just saying what I think is the best. But what do you guys think? Sound off in the comments if you have any differing opinions. Give your personal ratings of all the albums. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.